So I recently discovered that the British Columbia Ministry of Public Safety has a document, policy document, regarding domestic violence that basically instructs police officers and other parties to view it as a gendered crime where it's predominantly, a power-based crime that men inflict upon women, even though Statistics Canada shows that domestic violence is about equal. Yeah. So in the document, they justify it by saying that the majority of police-reported domestic violence is men attacking women. But of course, that seems a little circular. If the police are going to treat it as men attacking women, then of course most reports are, men are less likely to report. So my question is, since this is sort of an official government document, what can we do to get that changed? It seems like, it's kind of like the Canadian equivalent of the Duluth model.
Actually, I was talking to Lauren Southern on her show on Rebel Media the other day about the Jian Ghomeshi case. And one of the things that really struck me about that case is that what looked to be incompetence on the part of police investigators and the Crown in being able to essentially know what the case was about before presenting it in court and getting egg all over their faces, and just actually allowing their complainants to lie on the stand over and over and over about material things. That's not incompetence, that's policy, okay? That's policy now. And the problem with policy is it does not have to be debated in a parliament or a legislature. It does not have to go to the sober second thought of the Senate. It does not have to be voted on, right? Policy is chosen usually by a committee of hand-picked individuals, an action committee, right? Of hand-picked individuals who were not elected, but they're considered experts by some people, and they write a policy document that kind of, it's sort of like, in that movie, The Thing, when it puts out its sort of tentacles and digs them into people, right? That's what it does with the system, right? It's super easy to get it entrenched in the way the system works. It's super difficult to get rid of it, right? Because it's not legislation. You can't just say, okay, we're going to strike this law down, right? It has to be addressed through extremely difficult court challenges based on its constitutionality underneath the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right? Which in and of itself allows for exactly this type of discrimination. It says you cannot discriminate based on sex. And then in the very next line it says, well, except for because women used to be oppressed, so you can't, right? That's essentially what that document says, right? Is that, oh, you can't discriminate against women, but you can discriminate in favor of them. It's totally legal. It's totally it's written into our Constitution, right? So, yeah, there's no getting rid of it. There's really no, the only way you can get rid of it is if you amass so much public support that there's just no way that they can continue to do it, right? Either that or you do it incrementally over the next 150 years, right? But that's about it. I don't know if we're going to be able to get rid of it.
That's actually how it got in there. That's actually how it got in there in the first place. And I'm speaking from a perspective, again, United States law, and looking at the Violence Against Women Act, and the way that was brought about was a continued slow boil, continued chipping away a little bit at a time. And to be honest, and I'll probably get a lot of flack from saying this, but do you know how feminists became known as experts in the field of domestic violence? They told everybody they were experts, and that was it. I mean, that's basically the whole of how they got there. They decided to have involvement, and they told everybody it was a certain way, and they completely ran over the best expert that they could have brought forth instead.
Marie Strauss?
Actually, Erin Pitsey.
Oh,
was the person I was thinking of. She started the first in Chiswick, England.
In
She's
London.
In the UK, and she started the first shelter. And she learned things at that shelter. And one of the best ways to learn about people is to work with people. She learned things at that shelter that have been ignored by the entire domestic violence victims advocacy community for decades.
Erin Pitsey.
Erin
She
Pitsey.
opened the world's first domestic violence shelter in 1971 in Chiswick, London.
Look for a book. She's written numerous books, but probably the one that first comes to my mind is Scream Quietly or the Neighbors Will Hear.
And prone to violence.
Yeah, Prone to Violence, that's a good
What's
one.
her website? Domestic violence.
Yeah, it's
research.
Pizzey.
I think she runs whiteribbon.org now
Oh,
Yeah.
because the idiots at the White Ribbon campaign, which is like totally Duluth model based, they bought all of the domains except for .org, and so Paul noticed that, Paul Elam, and he was like, woohoo, I'm buying this. He bought it, and then he gave it to Erin.
Yeah.
So.
But what Karen was saying about raising awareness of this is vital because people have no idea. If you start talking about, the Violence Against Women Act is bad, the first response you get is, MRAs want to legalize beating women. That's not what we said. We talk about it being a gendered approach. One of the things that is completely ignored is two-way violence. More than half of domestic violence relationships are two-way. And feminists will characterize female violence as self-defense even when it's the initiating violence in a situation. And a lot of times they'll characterize it as not violent for women to do things that are characterized as violent when a man does it. If a man stands up in your personal space and yells at you at the top of his lungs, everybody knows that's violent. Everybody says, well, he's being aggressive. If a woman does it, you must have done something wrong. It's your fault, it's not her fault. Nobody would say that about a woman being yelled at by a man, but almost everybody says it about a man being yelled at by a woman. And if you push somebody and push somebody and push somebody and they push you back to get you out of their space, if a woman does that, it's considered self-defense against somebody who's being aggressive. But if it's the woman doing the pushing over and over again, putting her hands on your shoulders or your chest or your face and pushing, and you strike back and you're a man, even if all you do is put your hands on her wrists to stop her from hitting you or put your hands on her shoulder to move her away from you, that's considered a violent act. So where did we get here? If you look back in, actually, I think I've got this in an article. There's a link to a report from testimony in front of the United States Congress in 1976 or 78, in which a bunch of feminists, well-known feminists, spoke to Congress and told them that domestic violence was something that men do to women, that there was no data on female violence, there was no indication that men were suffering this problem, and this was how it needed to be approached. And that there's like, it's a 700-page document that it's linked to in the article. And the article is Abused Men and Boys, Feminism's Acceptable Losses, I believe. And what I learned when I was researching to see what needed to be changed in order to solve this problem was that there has been a concerted effort for all that time. And in order to solve the problem and get us back to a situation where laws regarding domestic violence approach the situation as something that both sexes do and both sexes need protected from, and both sexes need that commit it are equally in need of and entitled to therapy to improve their behavior rather than an approach as evil people who just hate the opposite sex and want to control them. In order to get to that point, we first have to get people to understand that when a woman does something violent, it's still violent, even if she's a woman. Even if we have more sympathy for her than we have for a man, it's still violent. And that in order to reduce that violence, we need to approach both sexes' violent behavior as a dysfunctional behavior. even if we don't demonize it, even if we don't say women are terrible people for hitting men, the way that we do say men who hit women are terrible people, or man who hits a woman isn't a real man. We don't have to do that to men. We don't have to do it to women. But we do have to approach the behavior as something that needs to be changed on a societal level. And if we can do that, if we can get society to that point, we can get society to a point of talking about changing law and policy without getting all up in arms and saying, because you want to change an act that's called the Violence Against Women Act, you're for beating women.
They say we live in a binary and a zero-sum game and want to pit the genders against each other. Yeah, that's what we're all about. So.
You're not going to answer? Okay. Sorry, I typed it out earlier. Sorry, it's more for Karen. You said earlier, I don't think we can ever achieve true equality across the board. So I was curious if you're rather cynically suggesting that there will never be a time where groups like SFUAMB aren't needed.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I think that we can maybe get to a place where everybody can just live with things. I mean, I don't think life is ever going to be perfect for anybody. There are some things that I don't think can be removed from sort of the human way of thinking. Like men's and women's brains are different. That affects men's ability to, like I said earlier, sort of come together collectively with each other. I think it impedes that a little bit, particularly when the idea is, when it's so easy to construe it as pitting men against women. So I think that we're not going to be able to ever get through it, but I think maybe we can get to a place where things are livable. And I'm perfectly fine with having, no advocacy groups, unless you actually need them, right? I mean, like, look at where feminism's at right now. They're bitching and moaning about how sexist air conditioning is, right? Okay, and they're bitching about it in an environment where women are allowed, right? They don't have to, but they're allowed to go to work with bare shoulders, bare arms, and bare legs, okay? And the men in that environment, for whom the air conditioning is set for their comfort level, are wearing long trousers, long sleeve shirts, buttoned all the way up to the top, a tie, and a blazer. That's what they get to wear every single day in that same office. And these women are saying, turn the heat up. It's freezing in here. No, put on some clothes, right? I mean, like, if you look at the level of complaint and the level of entitlement, the room should be geared towards me and my greater freedom to wear whatever the hell I want to work, right? And these guys can just sweat it out in a suit. Like, I'm sorry, if this is all they can find to complain about now, they need to go away, right? And eventually, it's my hope that we get to the point where people are going, if that's all they can, and really saying it and meaning it and it being true, if this is all they have to complain about, then they need to go away. I would love that. I think most men are going to be happy long before we hit that point. Most men are going to be okay with the situation. They're going to be content enough, right, long before we hit that point. Right, that point where we're unnecessary, that point where we're just a bunch of ridiculous douchebags complaining about nothing, right? Or complaining about things that are actually unfair in our favor. Right? I think that this movement is going to disintegrate long before it becomes completely unnecessary. So I don't think it's a danger that we're going to be around longer than we're useful.
I have something to say. I know you didn't ask me a question, but I'm going to say something anyways. I'm kind of from the Thomas Sowell kind of school of there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And I think myself and like Karen, like it's about finding the best trade-off, but we'll never find I think that's a problem with feminism today as well, is that they don't want the best trade-off. They want everything, because that's what a utopia is. It's everything. Everything is good. And that's really dangerous. So, yeah, I also don't think along utopian lines. Yeah.
Hello. So just got a quick question. I know you guys hate talking about the pay gap, but I got to get this out of the way. But you were guys talking about it. It just came to my head when you guys were just talking about it. I've noticed like recently on the Democratic side from the U.S. campaigns and all such, where Sanders and Clinton are talking about the pay gap, and I just kind of realized, thinking to myself, with having this false information and not actually looking into the details of this pay gap, I feel that our future generations will be persuaded in these lies and not realizing that it's kind of manipulative to the point where it kind of creates an out of balance towards women getting where they were. So do you feel like this kind of pay gap will be kind of exploited in the near future?
It will. It'll be exploited as much as the general public allows it to be exploited. One of the things that I was just talking about this earlier today, we can never sit back and trust our media. We can never sit back and trust our politicians. It's their job isn't necessarily to tell us the truth. And in fact, telling us the truth with politicians can be detrimental to their job, because their job is to maintain their status as elected officials. And in the media, their job is to get a readership. And so it's our job to force them to maintain credibility. It's our job to hold them accountable for what they say. It's our job to call them liars when they lie, and to tell them they can't have their jobs and continue to lie to us. Whether it's not voting for politicians who lie all the time, or demanding in writing, by writing to them and writing to the media that they stop lying, whether it's abandoning media that we know we can't trust for media that's newer, and when we fact check it, we find that they are not lying to us. Whether it's when you see an article in a publication that you like to read, and somebody has reported something that is factually incorrect, call them out on it in the comments section underneath. Write to the editor. Why are you allowing this lie to be told in your publication? I thought journalism was about sharing information, not spreading lies. That's what we have to do. And until we do that en masse, that stuff's going to be exploited. The ability to lie to the public with impunity will always be exploited by people in power and people who can profit from it, as long as they're able to maintain that power and maintain that profit by doing so.
I did want to also mention, because you said, do you think the pay gap, the wage gap is going to be exploited? Well, Obama's done nothing but beat this drum, okay? Mm-hmm. And one of the funniest things I think I have ever seen was his press secretary defending the White House's own wage gap to a reporter from the Washington Post, okay? Because in the White House, on the president's, the entire staff, right, women earn 88% of what men earn. And he was called on the carpet, and what did he say? He said, we pay men and women equally for equal work, but there are some mitigating factors, such as the number of hours worked and the years of experience and what kind of education they bring to the table and all of this other. Oh my goodness! And then, the next week, Obama's like, women only earn 78 cents to a man's dollar. It's a travesty. Women deserve equal pay for equal work. Like, liars, 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 liars. Absolutely ridiculous.
Even Hillary Clinton pays women on her staff less than she pays the men.
Oh, she pays them even more less than Obama does.
Yeah, she's been busted for that, and she's made excuses for it too. So this is like all across the board. Probably one of the angriest moments I had, though, in watching the election process and the campaign process take place was one of the Republican debates where they just had this big free-for-all, and I think there were like 12 people up on the stage. Oh, yeah. And they brought up the wage gap, and they brought up women's issues. And all of them just right down the line went through and started talking about what they were going to do for women.
Oh, yeah.
When have you ever heard politicians bend over backwards and fall all over themselves to talk about what they were going to do for men? They don't even do that for the most
Well,
part
and
with
these-
children.
Well, they do.
Only
Send
women.
them off to die in war.
Oh, yeah, there you
Yes.
go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But if you come back alive, you get a government, you get the GI loan.
And you get ignored
It's
by
not
the
just the corner.
you get ignored by the you don't get care, medical care. You get ignored by the VA.
I lost two.
Then went and did their own atrocities after they regained control. So being victimized gives you it's a really, really big incentive to not care about other people, to not respect them as human beings, to, just considering yourself a victim of, I'm a victim of this large black man in the second row, and therefore I don't have to consider him to be a full human being and deserving of rights. And so there's that. What the progressive left does, that because they are so dependent on sort of this idea of the sort of Marxist oppressor conflict, that they have this unbelievable urge to pit everybody in society against each other. But one thing that I do find really, really interesting is that the majority of the people who are actually engaged in this are wealthy, white. They're wealthy and they're white, right? They are academics, right? They are privileged people. They're highly educated, right? These are the people who are constructing all of these narratives and teaching them to young, impressionable, dumbass university students, right? Who then go out
Excuse me?
and... Just the dumbass ones. They're not all dumbasses. But, they just... So it's really interesting to actually see this sort of... There's these elites. They're wealthy. They're respected. They have positions of high status, right? They're not worried about money, for sure, right? And they are telling all of these young people who really have more important things to worry about than microaggressions. I mean, they need to worry about what's going to happen when they want to retire, because Social Security is going bankrupt, right? In the US and in Canada. They're going to have to worry about the fact that the population pyramid has been tipped on its head, and they are going to be there are a smaller and smaller number of them, and they are going to have to carry larger and larger numbers of elderly people who have higher and higher expenses and expectations because of advances in medical science. I mean, healthcare was easy for the government to pay for when all you had was plaster casts, penicillin, and Band-Aids. That was pretty much it, right? But now it's a lot more expensive, and it's my kids that are going to pay for all this, right? Microaggressions, who the fuck cares, right? But they're being taught. It's almost like they're being given this long con to distract them against all the really important things that they should be thinking about, and just ripping each other to shreds while they're doing it, right? It's I don't know if that answered anything.
I have a little bit to add, because I think most of the nature of the question was regard to how politics affects this and how it affects the approach. You kind of have to understand the difference between left and right, and how they approach law and policy, what they're trying to control. Because you're dealing with the same mass of people when it comes to politicians and policymakers. It's just that their excuses for the things they do are slightly different. So collectivists are more interested in controlling your property and how you use it, your money, your items that you use, the fruits of your labor, and even your labor itself. And traditionalists, particularly the conservative end of traditionalists, are more interested in controlling your family structure and maintaining a particular type of family structure. Now, it's neither one of them is necessarily evil for feeling entitled, or not entitled, but feeling like they are the best people for that job. Where it becomes evil is when they start doing it to the detriment of the public. And what we want to look at as a movement is In order to communicate with these groups and affect change with these two groups, when you have to approach politics, you look at what they're trying to control and what things they need to, that they won't understand about our goals or the issue at hand, that if understanding those things, if we can allow them to understand those things or help them to understand those things, it would change their approach. So when you're approaching a Republican politician, for instance, in the United States, or a right-wing politician that is a more family-oriented politician, you're not necessarily facing the same misconceptions about family structures and family law that you would be facing where you're looking at a collectivist and particularly somebody in the identity politics area. But at the same time, when you look at issues like the wage gap or myth or domestic violence or any more social issue that has been really hammered at by collectivists or by identity politics ideologues, they're not going to, you're not going to be holding the same misconceptions there as you would see with traditionalists. And you kind of have to look at what lessons you need to bring forward and what information you need to get across. And it's not a matter of withholding information. It's a matter of making sure you're targeting the areas where they don't know things and understanding that they haven't developed. That it's just as wrong to discriminate against a man in a particular area as it is to discriminate against a woman, and what that damage is, that they would understand, hey, this actually is an issue that I can identify with. And a really good example of that is in the area of sexual violence. I've noticed this in conversations on Twitter. I get a lot of pushback from feminists because I'm very critical of feminism's approach to this. And I got really good reason for that. If you look back in America's history, almost all of our research that comes out of my country, and it's actually affected world government, it's affected research on this throughout the world, is based on a type of survey method that was created by Mary Koss back in the 80s, that was designed to define people's experiences for them instead of asking people what happened to them and basing her understanding of prevalence on that. One of the things Koss did that was really reprehensible was define rape to exclude people who had been forced to penetrate their perpetrator. And what that does is it excludes female perpetrators who victimize males.
Well, it also excludes a Catholic priest who performs fellatio on a 3-year-old boy.
Well, it
right?
actually doesn't. Well, yeah,
No,
it does. But so what we end up with then is an entire body of evidence that rape is perpetrated by men against women, not the reverse, when it's not true. They designed the research to not see it. And so you approach the situation this way. Is it wrong to tell somebody that has been raped that they haven't been raped because of their gender? And this is a very fundamental question. And does it become not wrong because the gender isn't the gender that we sympathize with? This is something that social justice, whether you agree with identity politics, whether you agree with dividing everything into this person is more victimized because this person is a minority, or this person is female, or this person grew up poor as opposed to wealthy, the right to bodily autonomy is something that we can all agree on. And the fact that it would be wrong to define a violation of that to exclude a group of people based on who did it to them or based on what sex they are, that's something that we can connect on regardless. And there's a petition now because of conversations that were opened that way rather than approaching it as all of the feminist activism on this is bad, but actually going through and saying, well, hey, this is a problem and we need to do something about this situation. There have been feminists in the UK that have started a petition in response to men's rights agitation on this topic to include male victims and female perpetrators in the UK's rape law. And that's how you end up, that's how that affects it. That's how politics affects this, is how you know how to approach the people that you need to talk to get things changed. And what you need to know about them, what they need to know about you.
I do want to say, if you actually want a really, really, really cool lecture on sort of the difference between how the left and the right, or liberals and conservatives, I guess he calls them, approach things, and the different ways that they view just what is good. Jonathan Haidt, Haight, his Boyarsky lecture from, I think it was 2009 at Duke University. It's available on YouTube. Watch it. Everybody should watch it because it's a very good lecture.
We have about 10 minutes left, so maybe time for one more question or two if they're quick.
Okay.
Well, the questions are always quick. It's the answer.
Yeah.
Good point.
For the past 5 years or so, we've seen an explosion of discussion over men's rights, especially over social media, utilizing tools like YouTube, Twitter, and to a lesser degree Facebook, although they're like blocking everything now. But how important do you think that role plays in hopefully progressing more lobbyist groups, like groups like CAFE and things like that?
Well, I don't think that a group like CAFE could have existed the way it does until after there had been some headway being made online. National Coalition for Men down in the States has been around for a long time, right? And they have some very, very good sort of, they get private funding from private donors. They've always had a cash flow. They've always had an actual office. But they tend to do, they tend to write a lot of letters in exquisitely threatening legalese to, say, airlines who make male passengers move when they find out they've been seated next to an unaccompanied child because, oh, pedosteria, right? So they do that kind of stuff. They don't end up in the news very much. Unless there's a movie like Divorce Corp or something like that, where you would want to reach out. You'd be looking for. CAFE has put on a lot of events. They've gotten a lot of publicity and a lot of attention, and I don't think that they would have really been able to do that if it hadn't been for this sort of swelling of discussion online and on social media about men's issues over the last 5-6 years. So, yeah.
I got one thing to add to that. Part of the importance of this is if you got one person that writes to their legislator and says, hey, this problem exists and I would like to see something done about it, and that nobody else is writing to the legislator, and there's an opposing viewpoint that the legislator already has or that's already expressed, they won't do anything. They'll give you lip service, and that's it. If you have 50 people a day writing to them, and they become, either the loudest voice or they become a loud enough voice to compete in the arena of discussion on it, then the legislator has to pay attention. And that's one of the big differences.
Okay, do we have time for one more?
Yep, time for one more.
All right, I want to have a smoke scene.
Awesome. So, in conversation with people on men's rights and just issues of equality, I've had it happen many times where you can present blatant, like very clear empirical information to show that the side that they're stating is incorrect or insubstantial. And one of several things, well, more than that, but two things generally happens. There is a resistance to acknowledge it in the first place, and even if you get past that point, there is either a shutdown that they don't want to talk about it anymore, or they don't care. So my question is, and this is to anyone who has an opinion, how would you recommend, if you think it's possible, to get past any of those hurdles?
A lot of times when I'm in a situation, I'll gauge whether or not I think it's possible to get past those hurdles with that person. And if I think it is, I switch from making definitive statements to asking them questions. Because a lot of times people are more able to get a grasp on information if you help them look at things from their own side of it and,
they come
and
around
reach
to
that
it on their
conclusion
own.
themselves. Instead of saying, current rape law is bad, then you start asking the questions like I was describing earlier. Is it wrong to tell somebody who was raped that it wasn't rape because of their gender? And when they start thinking about it for themselves, when they're not being confronted with something that confronts their narrative, it makes it a lot easier for them to open up and actually think about it.
I would say too that, sometimes you have to look at it like, and this is why all of these discussions really should not be happening in private email conversations or personal messages with, or one-on-one, because sometimes, particularly when you have somebody who is like that, who's just like refusing to they're resisting accepting the evidence. They're claiming that it's false or it's propaganda that's been invented, or they somehow it's just different, and they don't want to talk about it. You're not discussing with them to convince them. You're discussing with them to convince everybody else who's watching, right? And so if they're completely intractable, there are some people, like Hannah said, that you can reach with just changing your approach, asking questions, being reasonable, being kind, right? But if you got somebody that, like, there are some of these women who stalk my channel, and they really need to be on medication. No, if you read their comments, there are 3 of them, and their comments are a lot like Vincent van Gogh's paintings. They're sort of beautiful in their scariness, but and their chaos, right? So yeah, but those kinds of women, one of the best things you can do, or those kinds of people, one of the best things that you can do is just poke them. Just keep poking them and just allow them to escalate out there in public where everybody can see they're representing the opposition to my position, right? Or people who are just extremely hostile, right? And you know that they're never, just go ahead and keep escalating. Make sure it's public. Make sure it's in a public comment section. Make sure it's somewhere where people are going to be able to see it, right? Because if all they've got is you're wrong and an asshole, people are going to notice. They're going to notice, and they're going to go, well, maybe I need to rethink this because, first I was on her side, but, or that male feminist side, but, you're presenting, and she's not presenting a case, right? So I think some people you just have to just kind of give up. It's hard when it's somebody that you know and care about.